Early in the morning on April 27, 2006, in a cozy house in a small town in Michigan, the telephone rang. When the homeowner answered the call, what she heard shook the ground beneath her feet, and immediately shattered her previous life. However, that conversation was nothing compared to the second phone call she would have to answer 5 weeks later. On Wednesday, April 26, 2006, the beautiful and sociable 18-year-old student Whitney was walking across campus to attend a lecture. Whitney was a freshman at Taylor University, located in Upland, Indiana. Her parents had also attended the same university, and now both Whitney and her older sister were students there. In reality, Whitney had wanted to choose a different university, but her parents told her that if she enrolled in a Christian college, they would cover 2/3 of her tuition. If she decided to attend a non-religious institution, they wouldn't pay for her education at all. Considering the high cost of higher education, the choice for Whitney was obvious. As Whitney walked through the campus, navigating through groups of other students, she suddenly became nervous, realizing how rapidly the end of the school year was approaching. Although she was excited to return home for the summer break in the small town of Gaylord, Michigan, where her parents lived, she was also saddened by the prospect of saying goodbye to her new friends whom she wouldn't see until the fall. Whitney had made many new friends in her first year of college, mostly fellow freshmen. However, she also had a few older friends because she quickly discovered that the older students were just as friendly as the freshmen, and had experienced many of the challenges of university life. If she asked them for advice, they were happy to help. Therefore, whenever Whitney had the opportunity to interact with older students during her studies, she took advantage of it, believing that she could learn something valuable. Just that morning, as Whitney was heading to her lecture, she noticed a poster calling for student volunteers to help decorate the banquet hall for a celebration honoring the new university president. Approaching closer, Whitney discovered that most of the registered volunteers were older than her. Upon hearing this, she wrote down her name as well. The rest of the day passed for the student as usual. She studied, socialized with friends, and finally returned to her dorm room in the evening, where she peacefully went to sleep. Of course, when she rested her head on the pillow that night, she had no way of knowing that only 24 hours separated her from events that would forever change her life. The next morning, Whitney woke up early, took a shower, brushed her teeth, and spent quite a bit of time deciding what to wear. Whitney wasn't vain, but she knew she would be spending the whole day with older students and university staff, so she wanted to look appropriate. Approaching the meeting spot in the parking lot, she saw a group of students standing near a university van. She didn't know them, but confidently greeted them, introduced herself, and since she was the first one they were waiting for, they all got into the van. The vehicle smoothly started driving north on Highway 69 towards Fort Wayne. It was there, just an hour away, where the banquet hall was located, and where the event was planned to take place. Whitney quickly struck up a conversation with 22-year-old Laura Van Ryn, who was sitting next to her. Whitney and Laura were not acquainted, but they resembled each other so much that another student wondered if they were related. The two beautiful, tall, slender blondes not only looked alike, but also discovered that they had grown up in small towns in Michigan. Laura had come to study from Caledonia, 2 hours south of Gaylord, Whitney's hometown. They were also both younger daughters of very religious parents and actively participated in sports, playing volleyball, basketball, football, and being fond of running. When the van stopped, the students entered the banquet hall they were tasked with preparing for the celebration. Over the next few hours, they arranged tables, chairs, set the tableware, and throughout this time, Laura and Whitney stuck together, engaging in friendly conversation. Finally, around 7 p.m., the volunteers decided that their work was done. They settled back into their seats on the van, and the vehicle headed back south. For a few more minutes of the drive, Laura and Whitney continued chatting, but like the rest of the kids, they soon felt the fatigue from their work. They grew quiet, gazing thoughtfully out of the window at the passing scenery. Approximately half an hour later, when the van was within 2 miles of the campus, a bright beam of light illuminated the interior of the vehicle. It rapidly intensified, reflecting off the faces of the people inside, and within seconds, the entire van's interior was brightly illuminated. Someone screamed in horror, and then complete silence fell. Within minutes, emergency calls flooded the 911 hotline from distressed motorists traveling on Highway 69, reporting that something terrible had occurred. When rescue workers arrived at the scene, they braced themselves for the worst, but they were still shocked by what they saw. Wreckage, shards of glass, and bodies were strewn everywhere. The light that suddenly filled the van's interior came from the headlights of a fully loaded truck driven by Robert Spencer. The truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel while heading north on the highway. The truck veered off the road onto the grassy median strip, but it didn't stop there. It veered back onto the road and collided with the southbound van carrying the students. When the truck struck the van, it literally tore off its rear portion and sent the van spinning out of control. As half of the vehicle no longer existed, the students were ejected and scattered in different directions. When the rescue services arrived, they found Robert still inside his truck, alive, but unfortunately, 5 out of the 9 people in the van could not be saved. A few hours later, early in the morning on April 27, Whitney's mother in Gaylord received a phone call. Her husband was not home as he was assisting the church in rebuilding homes after the devastating impact of Hurricane Katrina. On the other end of the line was the coroner, who informed the woman that her daughter had been involved in a horrific accident and had died. At the same time, 3 hours south of Gaylord in Caledonia, the Van Ryn family also had to answer a late phone call. But they were told that although Laura was in the same accident, she had survived and was in critical condition. The girl's parents arrived at the hospital early in the morning, followed by her boyfriend, Aaron. Laura's fellow students were already waiting for them in the hallway. The girl lay in a hospital bed, swollen, bandaged, with a neck brace, and in a coma. The family was informed that Laura had broken ribs, a collarbone, an elbow, and a leg. However, the most severe injury was the brain trauma. Although they had managed to stabilize the patient, it was uncertain if she would ever come out of the coma. Even if she did, her brain had suffered significant damage, which would likely affect her ability to live without external assistance. Understanding that, at best, it would be a long road to recovery, Laura's family decided to transfer her to a rehabilitation center specializing in brain injuries in Grand Rapids. Whitney's mother and sister also arrived at the hospital. They were literally steps away from her body, but the coroner assured them that identification was unnecessary, and even dissuaded them from entering the morgue. In addition, they were handed Whitney's handbag, which was dirty, filled with broken belongings, and emitted an indescribable smell of fuel. The handbag was found near Whitney's body, and the women realized that her body would be in a similarly horrifying condition or even worse. They couldn't bring themselves to look at the body as they didn't want to remember her that way. They simply transported their daughter's body back to their hometown of Gaylord. Whitney's farewell coincided with her 19th birthday, and her relatives decided to show a compilation of videos from her previous birthdays. Over 1,400 people came to say their goodbyes to her, which was approximately half of the entire town's population. The next day, she was buried in a closed casket. At the same time, Laura's relatives, who took turns sitting in the girl's hospital room, heard an incredible piece of news. Based on brain scans, it seemed that Laura would wake up from her coma, although it was unclear when. Laura remained in a coma for the next few weeks, but her wounds gradually healed, and all signs indicated that she would recover. Finally, on Tuesday, May 16, after 30 days since the incident, Laura regained consciousness. Initially, it seemed that her brain was functioning as it should. Her family couldn't believe it. It was a miracle. The girl was recovering quite quickly and soon was able to move her hands, legs, and sit up. Simultaneously, Laura's loved ones learned many new things about her. Aaron, Laura's boyfriend of 3 years, whom she planned to marry after finishing college, was amazed that her eyes had become much deeper blue, not as greenish as before. And when her sister accidentally lifted Laura's shirt, she noticed that she had gotten a belly button piercing. The girl's teeth also seemed to be shifted to one side, but all of this appeared insignificant. The main thing was that Laura was alive and on the road to recovery. Or was she? Soon, she did something that made the doctors, her family, and everyone around her doubt whether her brain was functioning properly. On Monday, May 22nd, a week after waking up from the coma, Laura sat on a hospital bed surrounded by medical professionals and her relatives. The doctor handed her a pencil and paper and asked her to write her name. Laura nodded, as if understanding the task, took the pencil, and very slowly, and with difficulty started writing the letters. But when she finished, and the doctor looked at what she had written, her scribbles made no sense. He asked the girl to do it again. She started writing with even more attention, but it was the same incorrect name. The doctor had to admit that Laura's brain injury might be more serious than he thought, and she was mistaking her own identity for someone else. However, as everyone would soon realize, the issue was not with that. Something much more serious was happening. The next alarm bell rang when Laura told her father that they were fake parents. Her words deeply hurt him because he interpreted it as her considering their relationship with her as fake, although accusing them of being bad parents was impossible. But his wife also began to think that if Laura wasn't actually Laura. Friends who saw Laura after her face stopped looking swollen also concluded that she was not herself. It was slightly easier for her sister Lisa to accept the truth than for their parents. One day, while taking the girl back to the room after therapy, Lisa stopped, knelt down next to Laura, and said that she was proud of her progress. Then she asked her to answer one question: what was her name? The girl replied, Whitney. But they explained to her that survivors of brain trauma sometimes confuse their own names. That's why Lisa asked how her parents were called, and she answered, Sirach, Newland, and Colin Sirach. Laura and Whitney had known each other for too short a time for Laura to know the answer to that question. Lisa understood everything but didn't want to frighten the poor girl sitting in front of her. She found the strength to praise her, calmly took her back to the room, and told their father and mother everything. When their father realized that the identification of his daughter had been done solely visually, a terrible truth descended upon the whole family. Laura had been dead for 5 weeks, and the girl they had been caring for all this time had parents who deserved to know the truth. On that dreadful day of April 26th, after the accident, rescue services started working at the scene, trying to determine who else they could help and who was beyond saving. They found a critically injured girl on the roadside, barely clinging to life. Medics rushed to her, placed her on a stretcher along with a nearby handbag, loaded her into an ambulance, and rushed her to the hospital. The doctors examined the identification in the handbag to identify the injured girl as Laura Van Ryn, while simultaneously attending to her injuries. As they slowly removed the bandages, it became evident that the accident had significantly altered Laura's appearance. However, her family didn't care about her looks. They were infinitely relieved that she was alive. But on Monday, May 22nd, when they gave Laura a paper and a pencil and asked her to write her name, she didn't write Laura. Instead, she wrote Whitney. It turned out there had been a horrific mistake, but nobody had known about it until that moment. When they found Whitney on the roadside, the medics assumed that the handbag nearby belonged to her. They compared the photo on the identification with the girl and concluded it was the same person. Astonishingly, at the same time, Whitney's handbag had landed next to Laura. A week after Whitney wrote her name on the paper, it was officially confirmed to be a case of mistaken identity. And once again, in the middle of the night, a disturbing phone call echoed through the Sirach family's home. It was the coroner, who requested Whitney's mother to bring someone else with her so she wouldn't have to hear the news alone. She called her older daughter, Carly, to join her. The coroner began to speak about the possibility that Whitney might still be alive. On their way to the hospital, they were filled with fear of what they would see. How should the patient look if Laura's parents couldn't recognize that it wasn't her? But their fears proved unfounded. As soon as they entered the hospital room, they immediately realized it was Whitney. The miracle for the Sirac family turned into a nightmare for Laura's loved ones. Not only did they learn that their daughter had been dead for 5 weeks, but they also feared that Whitney's parents would resent them for keeping them away from their daughter for so long. However, the Sirac spouses understood that they were partly responsible for the situation themselves. They didn't recognize Whitney's body, and Laura's family believed what they were told. They compared all the clues to puzzle pieces, but how could they know there was a puzzle that needed to be assembled? Both families understood each other's feelings, having experienced what one had already gone through, while the other was yet to face. A few days later, Laura's body was exhumed and sent to Caledonia. Although Laura and Whitney knew each other for only a few hours, the shared tragedy brought the two families together forever. For 2 years, they refused to discuss what had happened, respecting each other's feelings, emotions, and personal space. But then they decided to write a book in which they described all the events and their perspective on them. As for Robert Spencer, the driver who caused the incident, it was revealed that he had been behind the wheel for 9 hours longer than allowed. He admitted his guilt and was sentenced to 4 years in prison. He served a total of 2 years in prison. After the accident, he underwent recovery in the same hospital where Whitney was believed to be Laura. Reporters tried to provoke Laura's parents against Robert, asking what they would say and how they felt about the culprit of the accident. However, Laura's family rose above it. They showed generosity and even understanding, and neither of the two families filed lawsuits against him. The state of Indiana changed the procedure for identifying victims of incidents to ensure that such a mistake would not happen again. Whitney admits that she doesn't remember the incident itself, only the preparations for the banquet and the pizza they had as a snack after work. She doesn't even remember the time spent with Laura's family, and one of her memories was waking up with her mother nearby. Slowly but surely, she recovered physically and completed her education. And after 4 years, she got married in the same church where her funeral took place. Her chosen one was her boyfriend Matt Wheeler, who supported her during her recovery. They have 2 children,